Technology plays a big role in a lot of these cases, including Cindy's.
This one takes it a step further because her ex is a tech expert who is able to get into all our social media accounts, all our devices, and even post revenge porn.
And the fact that he's a millionaire means it's easy to cover his tracks.
While listening to her story, I thought if someone was tracking your every move, it'd be terrifying.
The mattress was ripped in half on the front yard, which I don't really know how someone rips a mattress in half. The doors of the house were open. Some of the rooms were trashed. And there was this letter that he had written me on the counter.
I'm Jaimie Beebe.
And I'm Jake Deptula. On today's episode of Strictly Stalking, we're chatting with Cindi, a flight instructor who was swept off her feet by a 29-year-old Bitcoin millionaire.
After teaching him how to fly, they immediately became fast friends, and he flew her around the country in his airplane, even staying at 5-star hotels along the way.
When his love bombing ended and Cindi started to notice red flags, he sexually assaulted her and physically attacked her.
He told her that if she turned to the police, it would be far worse for her than him.
After Cindi left him, he began stalking her through surveillance, violent threats, and most recently, revenge porn. Cindi, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
How did you decide to pursue flying?
So I was actually an Army officer living in Oklahoma, and my family had a history of aviation. So I was just kind of out there in Oklahoma, not a whole lot to do. So I decided to start getting my pilot's license just as a hobby. Because I figured if I wanted to do something after I got out of the Army, it'd be a good career. So basically from there, I just kind of fell in love with it. And then when I got out of the Army, I ended up pursuing it as my full-time job.
How long have you been working as a flight instructor?
I started flying in 2016, and then I actually started working very shortly after that. And I started instructing, so about maybe 2017. So it's been about 3 years. And it's been a ton of fun. I still am never tired of it. I love every second that I get to be in the plane.
Tell us about the first time you met your ex-boyfriend.
So I met him when he came in to get his pilot's license, and he actually just called beforehand because he was looking at buying his own airplane and he wanted some advice on different kinds of airplanes, or whatever he was looking to buy at the time. So we talked on the phone for maybe like 20 minutes, and we just really connected, and we're just talking about aviation and military and all that stuff. So then, he came in and learned to fly. We took him through his entire license. And then after that, we just stayed friends and kept flying together every once in a while.
What was your first impression of him when you met him?
The first impression is an interesting question because I think that you can see even in the beginning some of the angry tendencies or some of the red flags, even though at the time I didn't really know enough to know what I was seeing. So he was extremely charming. We were really good friends. He was really funny. And there was also just like this underlying feeling of being uncomfortable. And I've learned now to listen to that more when I meet people. There was a couple instances when something happened with the flight training process or just different comments that he would make that made me really uncomfortable. And I almost actually stopped teaching him at one point because he did something really unsafe in the plane, and he didn't really know that he did something unsafe, even though I told him, yeah, that was, one of the most dangerous airplane moments I've ever had.
Do you want to tell us a little more about that incident?
Yeah, so this was pretty early on in the flight training process, and I was a new instructor, so I kind of didn't really know what to look for in this particular takeoff that we were doing. So we were basically taking off, and we were flying a really light airplane, and if you it's called over rotating. Basically, you kind of pull the plane into the air before it's ready to fly, and it aerodynamically won't fly yet. So what it'll start to do is just basically lose control. So basically, he started to take off. And when you're flight instructing, you're kind of like verbally flying the airplane through your student, and your hands are not on the controls at all. So he really over rotated. We began to enter a spin partially, and we're like, 20 feet, 30 feet above the runway. And I started to take over, which is what you do when, it gets kind of outside of the safety envelope. And there was a moment of kind of pushback as I tried to take over the controls, which is something that you're obviously really uncomfortable with when you're flight instructing. But at the time, I was a new instructor, and I was like, wow, that was pretty dangerous. And he did not really respect the fact that I was telling him, no, you didn't understand what's happening there, and that was dangerous, and you should have given me the controls. So that was the second or third time we flew together. And I remember talking to one of my coworkers and saying, I may not fly with this student anymore. I may pass them off to you, which is just really weird to think about, like how different my life would have been if I had not continued to fly with him.
What did you know about him when you first met him?
Really nothing. I mean, I didn't really know any background on him. I think it's important to kind of look people up now as I move into dating again and everything. I just think that it's a safe idea. So I really didn't do any of that. And I wasn't dating him. He was just a student. So I didn't know anything about him, really. I just knew what he told me, which really wasn't much.
When did your relationship switch from student to friend and then to dating?
After he got his license, we really enjoyed flying together. We enjoyed talking, and we had a lot of similar life experiences. So he would come out and fly every couple of weeks because he hadn't bought his own plane yet. So we were just kind of friends during that time. And then I was going through a divorce at this time. And after I finished my divorce, we started dating. And really, it was part of that whole process. He was extremely supportive, and I thought it was so kind. And now I kind of look back as him recognizing that I was in a really vulnerable time in my life and kind of just swooping in, to help me, which, kind of made me vulnerable to him, basically. So it was kind of just a long process. I knew him for probably 5 months or so before we started dating, 5 or 6 months.
How did your friendship transition into romance?
I think a lot of it was just me going through a lot of life changes. So I grew up in a really religious, very sheltered household. And then I was in the military. And during this time in my life, I was kind of going through, not only going through a divorce and going through, being out of the military for the first year, but I was also just kind of going through this whole, what do I believe process. And I talked to him about a lot of that. And he was really supportive. And I felt so close to him when we were friends and as we started dating, because nobody had ever listened to me the way he listened, which now I know is part of the whole process. Is basically they know your entire life story. I mean, he still knows literally everything about me, and what that does is later on gives them ammunition for abuse, because when you tell them, your biggest regrets and your biggest mistakes in your life, it eventually gets twisted into, whatever they want it to be to make you feel horrible about yourself so that they can continue to abuse you. So I think that was a lot of the beginning process of just changing from being friends to dating. Was he just asked me so many questions about myself, and it felt so good at the time because I just, I think that's how you build intimacy, is just talking and hearing the other person. And it was so unique to me. I was like, wow, I never have had anybody listen to me this much and want to know this much about my life. And then later on in our relationship, having those things twisted and kind of thrown back in your face was so hurtful.
Madison is being stalked.
And she doesn't know the identity of her stalker.
Over the past 2.5 years, Madison and members of her family have been cyberbullied, slandered, and threatened online.
Madison turned to the police, who told her their hands were tied because they said no real crime had been committed.
After listening to Strictly Stalking, Madison reached out to us and is sharing her story on Patreon with the hopes that she can uncover the identity of her stalker.
You can learn more about Madison's story at patreon.com/strictlystalking.
And we'd like to thank our latest Patreon members: Why Is Mom Weird? Emily M, Bambi D, Penny T,
Faith H, Sarah C, Madison G, and Q, and Kayla F. Thank you so much for joining us on Patreon. What were the first few months of your relationship like?
The first few months were definitely a honeymoon phase, but it was like a honeymoon phase on crack. And what I mean by that is, I'm not a mental health professional by any means, but I've done enough reading to try to figure out and understand what happened in my life that this is called love bombing. So basically, this person asked me questions about myself. He knows me better than anybody alive. And he knew exactly what I wanted out of life. He knew exactly what I wanted out of a partner. And he presented that to me, and I'm really an adventurous person. I value experiences over possessions. So we went on trips around the world. He was spontaneous. We would fly to Key West for the weekend. It was just so fun. And to me, it was that moment of, wow, there's someone else out there in the world like me. But really, it wasn't real. It was him presenting to me this perfect version of our relationship. And then what happens later on in the relationship is you're constantly working to try to get back to that phase, of things are so good, what happened? So, it was a ton of fun. It was trips and adventures and laughing and all of it, going out to dinner and having deep conversations and just whatever you can imagine is like the perfect relationship for the beginning, and then it kind of started to shift into who he really is.
When did you first notice that shift? What was the first red flag?
The first red flag was actually when we were in Japan. So we had been in Japan for like maybe 5 or 10 days. And I started to notice that every time that we went on trips, he really didn't want to leave the hotel. And now that I know him better, I know that he has a really hard time being around people because he has violent tendencies. And at the time, he just kind of played it off as he was tired or whatever. But it was really weird. It was kind of like excessive to me. Like, okay, we're literally not leaving the hotel for 10 days, and I would just go do things on my own, which I'm fine with doing. But it was weird to me. And then every trip that we went on would be great, and there would be one outburst. Which what I mean by that is, for example, when we were in Vegas. I was kind of asking him, oh, hey, what do you want to do tonight? And he went into this tirade about how insensitive I was because, he was in pain. Like he was in, he had a headache and he had some back pain and some knee pain and things like that. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you felt that way. Like, trying to give him some suggestions on ways that he could feel better. Like, oh, do you want some Tylenol? Do you, like normal things that you would offer someone if they say they're in pain. And it was just, him going into basically there's no way you can win. You're wrong, whatever you say to him. And he's just going to be angry. So that was kind of like the cycle I noticed with him. Another example would be when we were in Japan, he got kind of overheated at one point, which again, like is not that big of a deal. And so I was just kind of like, oh, okay, do you want a glass of water? And he went into this tirade and yelling and screaming about how selfish and insensitive I was for not taking care of him and how people can die of heat stroke and all these other things. And I was just like, oh my goodness, what is happening right now? But then it would switch right back into normal, happy, fun mode. So you just kind of brush it off as like, okay, maybe he just had a headache. Maybe he's having a bad day. Maybe he's tired, because you're trying to make sense of this behavior, which does not make any sense.
I love my new natural deodorant from Each and Every. I've tried other natural brands that just didn't control body odor the way they should.
Each and Every has been found to provide odor protection equal to an antiperspirant without the aluminum.
The company was founded by 2 women in the beauty industry who were frustrated by the lack of high-quality natural deodorant options. One of the founders holds a PhD in molecular and developmental biology and used her in-depth understanding about how the body interacts within different ingredients to help design Each and Every.
I love knowing that the scents come from essential oils and ingredients that are vegan and cruelty-free. My favorite is the coconut and lime.
And Each and Every just launched sustainable plant-based packaging. It is available for all full-size mini deodorants and is an eco-conscious, carbon-negative alternative.
The gender-inclusive deodorant is formulated for sensitive skin. It's made without aluminum, parabens, baking soda, alcohol, and synthetic fragrances.
Most days I just throw on a black t-shirt and go. I love that Each and Every goes on smooth, dries clear, and keeps me odor-free all day.
Visit eachandevery.com/stalking today.
That's eachandevery.com/stalking for 30% off your first purchase.
Not eligible to combine with other discounts or subscriptions. eachandevery.com/stalking for 30% off your first order.
Did you feel at this time that he was controlling any parts of your relationship?
I think that the really interesting part of the control aspect of our relationship is how many times he said that he was not a controlling person. So in the beginning, that was really important to me because I am a very independent person. And he was saying, I would never control you. You can do whatever you want. Like, I want to support you in any way I can. And then it was really more later in the relationship that things got really controlling. And he did it in such a subtle and smart way that I almost didn't recognize that it was controlling. So basically what it ended up being is, kind of like, you can do whatever you want, but you're going to pay for it later. So it was really never directly saying like, you cannot do this. It was more conditioning. And I'm a really empathetic person, and I tend to get pretty upset if I know someone's upset, like I want to resolve issues. I don't do well knowing that there's unresolved issues between me and my partner. So I always want to talk about things. And so that was what he used a lot to control me, was just knowing that it's going to stress me out a lot if I think he's mad at me. And so I think that was more what he did. It wasn't so much like, you can't do this, which that I think would have been too obvious. I think I would have had more pushback. It was more subtle control methods, and just him trying to get me to think it was my own idea to do something.
Did you feel that he was also trying to isolate you from other things in your life?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mentioned earlier that I was kind of going through, I would say, some kind of like spiritual awakening. I was really thinking about what I believed if I was a religious person, all these different things in my life. And he used that to really isolate me from my family. And I'm really close with my family. Basically, pointing out things that they had done that were wrong or whatever it may be, which were just normal life things. My parents are good people. Like, my whole family's, healthy, and everybody loves each other. And so he would just start to triangulate people. So he would point out something that somebody did that was maybe hurtful or could be perceived in a negative way. And he would twist it around so that I had a negative perception of that person. So there was a time when I had not spoken to anyone except for work coworkers for almost 6 months. And that was a lot of what he used to really keep me in this abusive relationship. Was there was no voice of reason. There was nobody coming around and having dinner with us and being like, I cannot believe he talks to you that way. So I think isolation is a key tactic of abusers, because, you have to only have their voice in your ear to put up with this. And you have to get to the point where you don't trust yourself and you trust their opinion more than your own.
After you got back from Japan, what happened next?
I moved pretty shortly thereafter. And that's when things really took a turn for the worst. I moved to Colorado, and he was very angry about that. He had been involved in the whole process of me taking this job. I mean, I have voicemails of him the day I went to the interview saying, good luck on your interview. And then the moment I left, it was as if he was blindsided by it, and he pretended like he had no idea I was going to be leaving, and how could I do this to him? And, I abandoned him and all this stuff. And it was there that the emotional abuse really went into overdrive. And he would almost on a daily basis bring me to the point of having an emotional breakdown. And he would do this by just kind of like going back into all that stuff he knew about my life and explaining to me how, that's an indication of what a bad person I am. And then he would usually switch it at the end of this, whatever hour-long conversation or whatever, where I've been crying and he's been saying just horrible things to me. And he would switch to how he was going to help me. He was there for me. He still loved me in spite of all of this. He accepted me. And it's just so confusing. I think that was, I did not really understand that was what emotional abuse looked like. I really didn't know anything about, emotional abuse at all. I really had only heard about like physical abuse. And that was so damaging because you're going into such a stressful state mentally, physically, and emotionally. And then this person that just hurt you is now comforting you, and you're very confused. And really what it ends up doing is it gets you basically mentally, chemically addicted to this person because they're putting you through such extreme cycles of dopamine release that you don't realize that you're basically dependent on their goodwill.
When did the physical abuse start in the relationship?
This was a really slow process. It was maybe a year or a year and a half into our relationship. And I remember I was talking to one of my close friends, and at this point, she was trying to explain to me what abuse looked like. And I will never forget one of the things that she said, and because I was explaining some things that had been hurtful or made me uncomfortable, and she said, he hasn't hit you yet. He hasn't raped you yet. He hasn't killed you yet. And it's so sad to think about because that actually was the progression of the situation. It started with, gaslighting, emotional abuse, and then it just got worse and worse. I think the first time that he was physically violent was, we were talking in the kitchen, really, I guess more fighting in the kitchen, which involved, me crying and asking for forgiveness for something that I had done wrong this day, and him explaining what a horrible person I was, and he was so cold, he could turn off his emotions like a light switch. And I went to put my hand on his cheek to say, like, can you please look at me in a tender way? And he grabbed my wrist and he twisted me around and smashed my wrist down on a marble countertop. And he, maneuvered me so that I had to lay my entire face down on the counter so it wouldn't dislocate my arm. And I just froze. I was just like, this is crazy. I don't think you ever know what you're going to do till you get in that situation. And then there was another instance where we were, again, having one of our fights in his vehicle, and he wanted me to get out. And so he went around, opened the door, and basically threw me out of the vehicle. And it's really weird to think back on those instances now. And at the time I thought, well, he hasn't punched me, so this is fine, which is insane, but that's just, your brain is just trying to justify what's happening in your world. And it really escalated to one night when we had gone to a friend's house and we'd been drinking, and it got really out of control. And he slapped me across the face in the vehicle on the way home. And I was shocked because this was in your mind, you kind of put these boundaries where you're like, well, if he ever punches me, then I'll leave. And it's ridiculous, but that's just how the whole situation progresses. If he ever hits me in the face, then I'll leave, And so he actually did. And I was like, wow, I cannot believe this just happened. And we got out of the vehicle and we were in the garage and I'm crying. And I said to him, you just slapped me across the face, And he said, no, I didn't. And I was so shocked because he had done gaslighting before, but this was just so blatant. I'm like, no, you literally slapped me on the face. And I went and I said, no, you slapped me on the face, and put my hand on his cheek to say, this is where you hit me, And he picked me up by my throat and slammed me on the hood of my car. And he just held me there and choked me. And I just completely froze. You think you'll fight back. You really have no idea what you'll do till you get there. And then we went into the house and it just got completely out of control. He threw me into a door. My head was being smashed into walls. I'm running out of the front door of the house trying to get away from him. And the really crazy, scary part of all of this is in the morning, he was able to convince me that I was drunk and out of control. And all of that was him restraining me. And this is where in the morning he said, yeah, you were so out of control. You really have a drinking problem, which I don't, at all. I maybe drink once a year, so it's ridiculous that he even would claim that. And he said, yeah, I'm really glad you didn't call the police because, you could have gotten arrested for being drunk in public and you would have lost your job. And if you ever call the police, it'll be way worse for you than it will be for me. It escalated slowly, and it wasn't all the time, but there was definitely some moments it was out of control. And then the other thing that I remembered, after I hadn't been with him for a while, is he used to like fake punch me a lot. Like he would pretend like he was about to punch me and then stop, which is, obviously really sick to do that to someone. And I think that whole process was it's so strange to look back on, because you have these boundaries in your head of like, if this ever happens, I'll just leave. And the thing with these relationships is every boundary you set for them is going to be crossed, and I think that's one of the big signs of somebody who is abusive or may have a personality disorder, is they're just completely able to blow through all of your boundaries with basically no repercussions.
What was the final straw in the relationship that made you leave?
It's really weird to think about, because there wasn't one final straw. It was kind of a lot of things that built up. So I would say, one of the reasons that I left is because I do have a really supportive family system. And, I had been very isolated from people, but I had a few people who I could call and just completely be breaking down and just talking to them, So one of my good friends, I called her and was just talking to her, and like, I think that he's a sociopath, like I think that he's a really bad person. And she said, you need to get in your car right now. You need to go here, and basically just laid out for me what I needed to do, which really helped me. And then my parents as well, I asked my dad at one point, like, well, what do you think about him? And he said, look, I don't want to ostracize you, but I'm going to tell you this once. You need to get in your car and you need to leave right now, and you need to never look back. So I think that they were a big part of me actually finally getting out. And I think for anybody that is in this situation, it's important to understand that this is not your fault. You should tell people what's going on. I also had been going to therapy during the time that I was the end of our relationship, because he had convinced me that, I was the reason for all of these problems, and I was trying to make them stop. So my therapist said something one time to me that really stuck out. She's like, a lot of my clients are people that go to therapy because they live with people who should go to therapy. And that was kind of her way of saying to me, like, there's nothing wrong with you, like, it's really not you, it's him. And then another part of what helped me to leave was one of my coworkers actually was killed by her fiance during the time that I was working with her. None of us knew that anything was going on at home with her, and she went missing. And then eventually he was arrested for her murder, and we found out everything that happened. So one of the things that my mom said to me when I came up to visit her one time was, you need to get out. And if you don't, you're going to end up on Dateline. And I was so broken down that it was like physically starting to manifest. Like I couldn't look people in the eye. I was starting to have a hard time like driving because he was so critical of me driving, like things like that. So I think bringing in my family and just finally telling them like, hey, like I'm really struggling. And then they had the open door to be like, okay, this is not, we can't keep doing this. Like, this is really unhealthy and dangerous.
Did you turn to the police?
I did a few times throughout the process. One of the main times was when I first broke up with him when I was in Colorado. He was in another part of the country at the time, and he immediately flew out, and he showed up at my house and wanted to get back together. And I was not interested. And this went through kind of this crazy instance where I told him he could go into the house at a time when I wasn't there, get his belongings, and basically leave. And I was kind of like couch surfing at this time because I knew he was in town and I didn't want him to know where I was. So I was staying with friends. And I came back to the house with one of my friends who was a police officer because I didn't really feel safe going there by myself. And the mattress was ripped in half on the front yard, which I don't really know how someone rips a mattress in half. The doors of the house were open. Some of the rooms were trashed. And there was this letter that he had written me on the counter. And the moment I pulled up to the house and got out of the vehicle with my friend, he texted me and said, I guess the reason you're not going to see me is because you're with this other guy. So he was either watching or he had some kind of surveillance in the house. That was when I first went and got a restraining order. The next night, he actually showed up at one of my other friends' houses at 4 a.m. looking for me, and she was terrified and she called the police. So we had a police report from that, and I was able to get a temporary restraining order. I think what a lot of people don't understand is it's not that easy to actually get a restraining order. You have to prove what happened. You have the burden of proof. So a temporary restraining order was for 2 weeks, and there's basically no contact that they can have with you. And so during that time, he had lawyers contact me in order to try to convince me not to get a permanent restraining order. And this is when I really started to see that he had already kind of laid in place some plans. So during the time that I had the temporary restraining order, I realized that someone, it's probably him, had stolen a check from my house and written a check for $4,000 to an addiction center in New York. And I spell my name in kind of a unique way, and they had signed it the correct way. So it's obviously somebody who knows me, I also found drugs in the lining of my flight bag because I had remembered one time in our relationship earlier on, he had gone into this tirade about how easy it would be to ruin my life, and that I should be grateful that he hasn't done it. And he explained to me that all he would have to do would be to have me lose my medical with the FAA and make it look like I was a drug addict. So that was basically, I think, what he was trying to do. Is there was, a check to an addiction center. There were drugs in my flight bag, which is a huge issue. The FAA has a safety hotline that you can submit anonymous tips to. And somebody submitted an anonymous tip that I had, a disqualifying medical condition that caused me to need drugs to perform. And so it was obvious that he had, already made this plan. And because of that, I actually decided not to get the permanent restraining order because he is a very financially successful person. And I just thought, okay, if this is what he wants, I'll just stop and maybe he'll leave me alone. And the thing is, during this whole process, it made me panic so much that I actually ended up reaching out to him and saying, did you do all of this? And that's when he was able to manipulate again and get me to get back together with him, which I think is really hard for some people to understand if they've never been in this situation. I think it's 7 times that people will statistically go back to their abusers. And the reason for that is because they have a separate narrative that they have basically fed you. There's one narrative, which is the truth, which is this person is the problem and they're abusing you. The other narrative is there's some combination of things that you did to deserve this or other things that happened that would explain it. This is where we always get that, oh, I fell down the stairs. It's well, that person probably halfway believes that, and that's where this is really dangerous is these people are so manipulative that they're able to really convince you that something happened that didn't happen. So I think that's really important to understand if you are someone who's in an abusive relationship or someone who is, there should be no guilt associated with these choices. You were in a situation that nobody else has ever really been in. You should not have had to be in this situation. And you did the best that you could with what you had at the time. And really all you were trying to do was be safe, So he basically fed me some story about how this was, done by some colleague of his that was trying to protect him from getting a restraining order, blah, blah, blah. And I was just panicking so much that I got back together with him because he was telling me he would help me with it and, all of this other stuff.
What happened after you got back with him?
It was, the same kind of behavior, the same kind of emotional abuse. And he had, right before we had gotten back together, he had basically explained to me how depressed he had been and he had seen the error of his ways and he was sorry, and he kind of told me everything that I wanted to hear. They'll say anything to manipulate you. They'll make suicidal threats and things like that. They'll do literally anything they have to do. And that was exactly what he did. He flew in one day when I was, before I got back together with him, and he was saying that he had seen what he had done wrong and he was so sorry and he had been depressed and he was going to therapy And he told me that he was just going to sign the plane over to me because he was going to go into the woods and shoot himself. And he was crying real tears. And I don't really know, what was going on with that. I can never really say if that was real or not. I really don't think it was. I think it was all manipulation. But you really, you have someone in front of you who's saying that they're going to kill themselves. You're going to support them. You're not going to leave them alone. You're going to be there for them. And that was a lot of part of what had us get back together. And then, of course, there was no change. There was no, magical epiphany that he had that changed who he was as a person. It was always going to be that way with him.
How did he react after you broke up with him?
He went straight back into the love bombing, which is basically like, I love you. You're the love of my life. I'm so sorry. Like, please come home, blah, blah, blah. And I just recognized it. I had seen the pattern at this point, the cycle of abuse, which is they idealize you. You're the best thing that's ever happened. You're the most wonderful person around. Then they devalue you. They start picking apart everything that you do, and they start twisting things around, and then they discard you, which is they just don't need you anymore. Maybe they found someone else, or maybe they're done with you for that day, and it's like they're so cold. There's no emotion towards you. I just completely, stood my ground because I was done. And he went into kind of obsessive texting, calling, writing these long emails, and I didn't give in. Like, I could just see what he was doing now at this point. So this is when I think it kind of transitioned into the stalking more. Is he was calling, texting. I was saying, I don't want to speak to you. I made a rule for myself that I would not get on the phone with him because he's highly intelligent and he's highly manipulative. And I knew that if I got on the phone with him, he'd probably be able to convince me to come back. I literally went through a detox phase where, I slept for days. I couldn't think clearly. I was having like shakes because you're so chemically dependent on this person from all of the intermittent reinforcement and basically from Stockholm syndrome. There's no healthy way to interact with these people. They're going to do whatever they're going to do. So calling, texting, making, fake social media profiles and trying to follow me, sending flowers to locations that I was at, that he shouldn't know I was at, and calling me from other phone numbers, texting family and friends. It was just anything you can think of other than him actually showing up, which I'm surprised he didn't. He would also, like, if I was at a certain airport, he would fly to the airport just next door. Things like that. It was just sort of like he wanted me to contact him, and he would always say these things about how he was just going to go off the grid, like he was like, oh, I'm going to throw this phone out tomorrow and change my number. So if you want to talk to me again, just give me a call back tonight, and of course he wasn't doing any of that, so it was just, he was just trying any means necessary to get in contact with me. And at this point I was completely done, and I had seen the pattern, and I was never going back. But that was pretty much what he did until I blocked him on every avenue. And then he would still call me from other phone numbers sometimes, or find work emails that I had made that he should have no way of knowing about and email me on those. So it was just like an obsessive barrage of attempted communication.
Do you feel that he was using surveillance throughout your whole relationship?
I think he must have been. Yeah. I really have no proof that he was using surveillance other than the fact that he knew things that he should not have been able to know. So I've never found like a recording device or anything like that. But when we got back together, he kind of, I think, lost control at one point and got really angry at me because he was telling me, I know dates that you've been on. I know things that you've said to other people. I know, so it was things that, he could have only known if he had literally been reading my text messages or listening in my house and in my vehicle. So, he knew my location as well without having, location turned on my phone. So he had to have some sort of surveillance. He had to have some sort of GPS tracking. And even early on in our relationship, like when I had first moved to Colorado, there was one instance where I know he had to have some kind of recording device or like something in my vehicle. I was pulled over by a police officer for having my registration expired. So it was a totally valid traffic stop. And the officer pulled me over and, went back to his car to write me a ticket. Wrote me the ticket, pretty normal event. And I called my ex and was about to tell him what happened. And the first words out of his mouth were, "How was Officer Shepard?" And, he was not on the phone with me, and he knew the name of the police officer that had pulled me over 3,000 miles away from him. So I really don't know any way to explain that other than he probably had some sort of listening device in my car, or my phone or something like that. And that was pretty early in the relationship. So I think that he probably did it throughout. I know that, certain types of phones are really hard to hack into, but I really think that he has had access to it. Because again, there's just certain information that he has known that he could only know through having read my text. And I've changed my Apple ID, how many times in the past 3 years, so I really wouldn't put anything past him. I mean, he's a really tech savvy person. So a lot of the police officers that I spoke to really doubted what I was telling them. And I'm like, well, look, you need to understand this person is the person that would teach you how to do these things. This is the person who has literally taught classes to the FBI. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility to say that, yeah, he does have access to my phone somehow,
Did you ever question him after the Officer Shepard incident?
I did. Yeah. I mean, I basically was like, I want to know how you know that. Like, I'm not laughing. This is not a joke to me. That's really strange. And that doesn't make sense to me. And he really wouldn't give me an answer. At one point he said that he had just called dispatch, which I actually called dispatch and asked them, is that possible for you to give out the name of an officer who's at a traffic stop? And they said, no, we would never do that, and no, nobody has called about that. So he tried to say that. And then I basically told him like, hey, I don't think that's what happened. Like, and I tried to kind of play it off like, look, I'm not mad at you, but how did you know that? And he just switched into being angry and, how ungrateful I was that I didn't appreciate the fact that he was looking out for my safety because this officer had pulled me over, on a side road at night and I could have been in danger. Just again, like, how did you know I was on this side road, So, I mean, I did question him, but again, it's like there was no way to really get anything out of him because he would just go to being mad and then I would shut down and back off because I was just so conditioned to try to avoid that abuse at any cost,
What were some of the other things that he did after you guys broke up?
Just trying to get in contact with me. He reached out on social media a lot. He made fake social media accounts trying to get in contact with me, sending flowers to work, to locations I was at, all kinds of things like that. He also would, fly to different locations. So throughout the time that the first time I broke up with him, he would fly back to Colorado and he would turn off the transponder on his plane, which is what radar uses to track your plane's location. So I had websites where I could look up his plane's location, which anybody can if they know how to do it. And obviously I do because I work in aviation. And he would turn off his transponder so that I couldn't see where he was in the world because he literally could be anywhere in the country, within a few hours with his plane. So that was a big one. He, had told me the whole time we were together that he didn't have any social media. And then he made an account and he would tag my location in some of his pictures and just little things like that, just kind of trying to get me to constantly think that he could be around. He found an email address that I made for work and he started emailing me to that. And I kind of played along for a bit and I would email him back and just, check it every couple of weeks and say like, oh, sorry, I don't check this much. Like, hope you're doing well. Just trying to kind of keep him happy and keep him from reacting too strongly. And eventually I just deleted it because, I was really tired of having this person involved in my life at all. I really did not want to talk to them. I wanted no contact with him. He was a very hurtful person to me. Like, I don't owe him anything was kind of my mindset. And this is actually, when I first deleted it, I expected some sort of repercussion. And nothing happened for a couple weeks, a couple months actually, even. And then this is when a lot of my Instagram followers, who are people I actually know, I'm not like a big social media person, so these are like high school friends and stuff. They got a message from a fake account to go look up my username on Pornhub. And I initially thought that this was just like another way to get me to reach out to him. And so I didn't do anything. I was like, I'm going to stand my ground and I'm going to keep no contact. And nothing happened. A couple days went by and I was periodically looking up my name on Pornhub, which is something I never thought I would have to do. And then one day when I opened the internet on my phone, the browser was there with a video of us, and it was revenge porn of me and him that he posted on the internet. And I basically had an emotional breakdown because, this is such a violation. It's such a horrible thing to do to someone. And it was just so scary too, because what he had tagged the video as is not something I ever would have looked up. And it was just open on my phone. So, I really, that one really hit me hard because even with everything he had already done to me, for some reason, I thought that was something he would never do. I just think that's such a heinous thing to do to someone. I decided that I still wasn't going to contact him, because I really thought that this was just another way for him to get me to reach out to him. So I didn't contact him at all. I contacted the police and I submitted another report. I've submitted God knows how many police reports at this point that nothing has happened from. And I just decided, I understand this will probably be pretty hard to track anything down, but I still want to document this and show that I followed through with, going to the police. And it was really a negative experience with the police for me. And I think part of that in the police's defense is just our system. And it is pretty hard to prosecute these crimes because, you are innocent until proven guilty in this country. That's a good thing. But at the same time, there's not a whole lot that the victim of this kind of a crime can do. So the detective called me that was assigned to the case. And the first thing that he said to me was, how is it possible that the browser was open on your phone? I really don't think that's possible. I've worked these cases a lot and I just really don't think that's possible. And I was kind of already annoyed because, I would think some of the first things that you could say would be, are you safe? Do you feel that you're in a safe place? Like anything else, really, anything besides that of questioning whether it actually happened and questioning whether I'm telling the truth or not. And so I said, yeah, this is what happened, and just went over the story again. And he kept asking that same question probably 5 times. And then I finally stopped him and I said, look, what you need to understand is this person is extensively versed in technology. They're someone that has worked for companies that are worth billions of dollars in technology. And they're one of the original members of those companies, so this is actually possible for this person to know how to do this. And this person, has been tracking me with my phone. They have been tracking me with surveillance as far as I know. So yeah, it is possible. And also, and I really tried to explain to this detective, I was like, this is not an appropriate way to handle this conversation. You need to obviously do your job and you have to determine if a crime has been committed. I understand that, but you're a professional that works in this field. You need to be educated on how to speak to victims of domestic abuse, sexual assault, and stalking. And this is not how you do it. And he basically, continued with even worse questions. The next thing he asked me was if I personally watched pornography, and if so, what kind? And I was just completely shocked because that's obviously not appropriate, And what he was really trying to get at was maybe I had just been watching pornography on my phone and left the browser open and it just happened to somehow be my video. It just makes no sense, So I was pretty upset by that because it felt like, honestly, like a re-victimization. And again, I was like, okay, what's the right thing to do here? The right thing to do is to call his supervisor and report this detective. So that's what I did. And it was not a pleasant experience there either. It was really the lieutenant just backing up the detective and explaining to me how I misunderstood what he had been asking. So basically what that, ended with is there's really no way for them to track it down. They could call him and question him and hope that he'll incriminate himself. And that's just, I think gonna not go anywhere. So I really decided not to pursue that because I just felt there was no hope with getting him prosecuted for that. And furthermore, I mean, if he was arrested and convicted, that it's not a whole lot of jail time and he would make bail. And then, I just felt like it wasn't safe for me to continue with that.
Did you reach out to Pornhub to request the video removed?
They were probably the most supportive organization that I have worked with through my entire process. Unfortunately, the police really didn't help much. The judicial system was pretty difficult to work with as well. And Pornhub was awesome. They took the video down. They apparently have some kind of software where that video cannot be re-uploaded. And it was down within a number of hours, which obviously when you don't want that kind of thing out in the world anyways, that's the best case scenario, is just get it down quickly.
When is the last time you heard from him?
I would say a couple months ago, about 2 months ago, I deleted that last work email because I didn't want to have any contact with him. And I had been, just kind of like reading his emails and not replying to them for a while. So he hasn't directly contacted me in a while. The whole revenge porn thing happened only a few weeks ago, which it was really disheartening to me as well, because I finally had like a breath of fresh air where I thought maybe this is done, and then he came back with something even worse. So I don't know what's going to happen next.
Do you think that he'll ever stop stalking you?
I mean, I think it's either going to escalate to a point where I can actually get him arrested, or he'll lose interest. Unfortunately, I think that he would probably lose interest because he has found a new person to be obsessed with, which I don't wish that on anyone, But I honestly think that's kind of the best case scenario, is that he just finds someone else that he falls in love with and doesn't care about me anymore enough to do this. But one of my close friends that I was talking to about this said, you had the audacity to leave him and to know who he is and what he is. So that's why he's still doing this. So, I mean, I really hope that he stops. I have no way of knowing if he will.
What would you like to see happen to him?
I've heard you guys ask this question to other people before, and I'm always so impressed by their answer, which is usually that they hope that this person gets mental health counseling and that they're able to be, healthy, productive members of society. And I really don't know if that's possible for him. I think that people can change, but I think that they have to really want to. And I have been in therapy sessions with him, and I've seen him manipulate counselors. And I really don't know if he's going to ever change. I think that this is deeply rooted in who he is. So then, what is the best case scenario is just that he can have some kind of life where he's happy but isn't hurting anyone else. I mean, I don't even know what that would really look like. But that's the best that I can really hope for, because I really don't see him being rehabilitated or being given some counseling and he sees, how to be a better person. I think that he is a sociopath, and I think that he does this strictly because he is bored. And I really think he enjoys the power of hurting people and of hurting women, and of hurting women who are, smart, driven, independent people, and breaking them down. So I really don't know what the fix is for someone like that.
If you could talk to someone that he's currently pursuing, what would you tell them?
I think I would tell them, to someone that he was pursuing, or really to anyone that is starting a new relationship with someone, you need to just listen to how you feel around this person. I think a lot of things are intuitive and we know a lot more than sometimes we give ourselves credit for. And, pay attention to his actions, not his words, is what I would say. Somebody can say that they're not controlling or that they're not a violent person, but what are they actually doing? So I would just say, keep your eyes open and listen to how you feel around them. As I've, gone through dating a little bit more, I've had moments with people that I've been on a few dates with where they said something that made me uncomfortable, and I've stood up to them, and in a very polite, respectful way, I've said, I'd rather you not call me that or address me in that way. And I've had a couple instances where they've completely blown up, and it's like, thank you. Like, I'm so glad you showed me that now, because I gave you a boundary and you had a meltdown. Like, that tells me everything I need to know about you. There should never be someone that one day you're the best person in the world and the love of their life, and the next day you're the most horrible human being that's ever lived. That's not healthy. That's not normal.
How has your life changed from this experience?
So I've continued to go to therapy. It's been really helpful for me. I've worked with some really awesome professionals, and I would really suggest that to anybody that's been through this kind of abuse. Really anyone in general. I mean, I think all of us have things that we can learn about ourselves and we can grow.
Cindi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys.
If anyone out there is in need of help or is a victim of stalking, please reach out. You can find a list of resources on our Instagram at StrictlyStalkingPod.
You can watch our episodes at youtube.com/strictlystalking.
And now we're on Patreon, where you can sign up for exclusive bonus episodes, live chat sessions, and check out show merchandise. Just go to patreon.com/strictlystalking.
I'm Jake Deptula.
And I'm Jaimie Beebe. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Strictly Stalking.